Valyrian Freehold. The term Valyrian Freehold refers to the area of land controlled by the Valyrians on the continent of Essos. Centered around the city of Valyria in the eponymous peninsula, the Freehold was the greatest civilization of its time and at the height of its power covered over half the known world. The Valyrian Freehold was a great territory that spanned much of the continent of Essos, but has since fallen to ruin approximately 100 years before Aegon's conquest, when it was brought down by a cataclysmic event known as the Doom of Valyria. At its prime, the Valyrian Freehold encompassed most of the eastern continent and reached as far as the current Free Cities and the island of Dragonstone off the coast of Westeros. The Freehold was technically never an empire, however, for ease of reference it tends to be referred to as one. The Freehold was an advanced civilization and the dominant military and cultural power of the known world. Its capital was the city Valyria. The Freehold was ruled by the Lords Freeholder, powerful noble families. The most powerful of these were the Dragon Lords. Origin. Ancient Valyria was a civilization of humble shepherds who discovered dragons in the 14 Flames, a ring of volcanoes on the Valyrian peninsula. Valyrian stories claim that dragons originated in their lands, although tales from Ashai claim the beasts were brought to Valyria from the Shadowlands. The Valyrians tamed the dragons with magic, taught by a vanished people from the Shadowlands according to the Ashai, and mastered the technique of raising and training the dragons into devastating weapons of war. They began expanding their influence, establishing the Freehold with the city of Valyria as its capital. Magic flowered, topless towers rose toward the heavens where dragons soared, stone Valyrian sphinxes gazed down through eyes of garnet, and smiths used spells to forge Valyrian steel weapons of legendary strength and sharpness. The rise of Valyria. Thought to initially be a modest community of shepherds, the Valyrians rose to prominence 5,000 years ago after they discovered dragons living in the 14 Fires, a string of volcanoes in the mountains of their homeland. After taming the mighty beasts, the Valyrians used them to conquer surrounding lands of the Valyrian peninsula and began expanding outwards. Rise to power and the fall of Guise. Some 5,000 years ago, in the early days of Valyria, the old empire of Guise dominated and controlled much of Essos. The Giscari attempted to stop Valyria's expansion and the burgeoning Freehold was involved in a series of great wars against the old empire. The Giscari lockstep legions attacked Valyria 5 times, but they could never defeat them. With the help of dragons, Valyria was able to defend and emerge victorious each time. Finally, in the last of the Giscari wars, the Valyrians marched on their capital, Old Guise, razed it to the ground, and sowed its fields with salt, sulfur, and skulls, obliterating it and thereby destroying the old empire of Guise. Adopting slavery from Guise, Valyria expanded its influence over the surviving Giscari colonies of Slavers Bay, and continued to conquer and colonize further. The Giscari Empire, located on the opposite shore of Slavers Bay from the Valyrians, was the first major power to face them in battle. Seeking to halt Valyrian expansion, the Giscari declared war on their neighbors. Massive legions of Giscari slave soldiers marched against Valyria in a series of 5 major wars, but each time they were defeated. The Freehold's forces then marched on the Giscari capital of Guise and laid waste to it, leaving little more than a smoldering ruin behind and nearly eradicating the Giscari people and culture from history. Western expansion. The Valyrian Freehold continued to expand and conquer further west, capturing many slaves from conquered lands and using them to mine great wealth from the 14 Flames, as well as build great cities and roadways that led to Valyria. For many years, the Valyrians were at peace with the Rhoynar civilization of the Rhoyne, west of the Valyrian peninsula. From the colonial freehold of Volantis, the Valyrians instead crossed the Rhoyne and marched west to wage war on the Undals of Andalos. Rather than be enslaved by Valyria, the Undals crossed the narrow sea and invaded Westeros. The Valyrians overwhelmed the remaining Undals of western Essos and established colonies west of their peninsula. The Valyrians are believed to have traveled as far as Old Town, predating the arrival of the first men and trading with the elder races, according to Jellicoe. Sept and Barth also claimed Valyrians came to Westeros because their priests prophesied that the doom of man would come out of the land beyond the narrow sea. Archmaester Perez Tan speculates some tragedy or mishap fell upon them and led them to shun Westeros ever after. Rhoynish Wars. The Rhoynish Wars were a series of wars fought between the city-states of the Rhoynar and colonies of the Valyrian Freehold between 950 BC and 700 BC. They are described in Beldakar's History of the Rhoynish Wars. The wars were concluded in the Second Spice War, when the Valyrian colony Volantis turned its eyes to the ancient and high civilization of the Rhoynar. Prince Garin of Croyane led an army of 250,000 men and defeated the Valyrian armies at Selharis, Balasar, and Volaneris, where they won their greatest victory by defeating an army of 100,000 men and killing 2 dragons in the process. However, the Valyrians responded with an overwhelming force of 300 dragons, capturing Garin the Great and burning the Rhoynish armies. Princess Nymeria of New York Tsar led the exodus of the remaining Rhoynar out of Essos, eventually arriving in Dorne. The singers say her 10,000 ships were filled with women and children, suggesting most of the men of fighting age had died in the conflict with the Freehold. Afterward, the Valyrian Freehold became the dominant civilization in the known world, with its own language, religion, and customs. The Freehold founded a number of colony cities, connected by a network of roads, all of which led back to the capital city. Several of these colonies in the west became the Free Cities. They eventually came into conflict with the Rhoynar city-states along the Rhoyne River, leading to the Rhoynish Wars. The fighting culminated about 1,000 years ago with the defeat of the Rhoynar and destruction of their cities, with the survivors fleeing in a mass migration led by Nymeria, whose refugee fleet eventually settled in Dorne in southeastern Westeros. A few centuries ago, one of the great families of Valyria, the Targaryens, established the fortress of Dragonstone on an island off the coast of Westeros, using it as a trading outpost of the Valyrian Freehold. Valyrian imperialism. At the height of its power, the Freehold stretched over most of Essos west of the Bone Mountains. Many of the numerous cities were connected by dragon roads. The Free Cities, the self-ruling daughters of Valyria, are spread throughout western Essos. Volantis and Tyrosh began as military outposts, while Myr and Pentos were founded by merchants in Undul territory. Dragon lords established Lys as a pleasure retreat. Religious refugees founded Lorith, Norvos, and Qohor. Assaria was founded as a colony near the kingdom of Sarnor. Braavos was founded by slaves who rebelled against a Valyrian slaving fleet, and this secret city did not accept the rule of Valyria. Other cities and towns founded or conquered by the Freehold were governed by archons from Valyria. The Valyrian peninsula contained Oris and Tyria. Near Volantis were built Selharis, Bolinaris, and Balasar. South of the Painted Mountains were Borash, Mantares, and Tolos, while located in Slavers Bay were Velos on the Isle of Cedars and Illyria. The greatest remnants of the old Empire of Guise were Astapor, Meereen, and Yunkai. Other Giscari settlements were Gozai on the Isle of Cedars, Gardak, and what are now Vis F and Vis Maja. It is unknown if New Guise, located south of ruined Old Guise, owed allegiance to Valyria. South of the Summer Sea, the Freehold controlled Gagassos on the Isle of Tears and also had 3 failed colonies at Basilisk Point and Sithorios. Valyrian cities of unknown location included Aquos Dean, Draconis, Mysa Fair, and Rios. Among the ruined cities of the Rhoynar were Aarnoy, Croyane, Goyandro, New York Sar, Sarmel, and Sarhoy. The Doom and Aftermath. For nearly 5,000 years, Valyrian supremacy remained uncontested. However, a cataclysmic event known as the Doom, a massive volcanic eruption of the 14 fires, laid waste to the Valyrian capital, its people, and the surrounding lands. The Valyrian peninsula itself was shattered and the ocean came sweeping in, becoming the Smoking Sea. Dragons, as well as Valyrian recorded history, spells, and knowledge were lost. With its center of power destroyed, the empire collapsed. Of the mighty families of dragon lords who ruled the Freehold, only House Targaryen survived, as it had established Dragonstone far across the narrow sea years before the Doom. The surviving colonies of the Valyrian Freehold split up into rival independent city-states. In the west, they became the Free Cities. In the east, the conquered Giscari cities of Slavers Bay reasserted their independence, but 5,000 years of Valyrian domination had swept away most of their original culture. With the heartland of the Freehold destroyed, its surviving colonies to the west and east reasserted their independence, politically fracturing the continent and initiating a series of savage wars for dominance known as the Century of Blood, during which Volantis attempted to reform the Valyrian Empire under their rule, but ultimately failed. Several of these colonies formed into the Free Cities in the west, and the cities of Slavers Bay in the east. The Valyrian peninsula itself in the center remained devastated and largely deserted. Meanwhile, without the Valyrians and their dragons to keep them in check, the Dothraki mounted hordes swept across the continent from the central plains of the Dothraki Sea, plundering and carving out new domains from surrounding areas. From the Dothraki point of view, the Doom started their own golden age of conquest and expansion. In the far northwest of Essos, the hidden city of Braavos, founded by escaped slaves who fled Valyria, now revealed itself to the world. While the other Valyrian colonies were left in chaos, Braavos was an island of stability because it had no political or economic ties with the Freehold, and quickly rose to become the most powerful of the Free Cities. The ruins of Valyria in the Smoking Sea remain and are considered to be cursed by other civilizations. Some believe that the Doom still rules Valyria, inhabiting it with demons and preventing anyone from ever entering the ruins and emerging alive. In response to the disease known as grayscale, the cities of the east send those most affected by the plague, known as the Stone Men, to the ruins of Valyria to die. The advanced disease means that few, if any, of the stone men retain any lucid thought, becoming monstrous creatures who attack any who wander through Valyria. Dragonstone. Some 2 centuries before the Doom, the Valyrian Freehold colonized the island of Dragonstone in the Narrow Sea and established a citadel there, with ineffective resistance from the local lords of Blackwater Bay. The island was the westernmost outpost of the Freehold. In 114 BC, Daenerys Targaryen, the maiden daughter of Enar Targaryen, had a vision of the destruction of Valyria. House Targaryen abandoned their homeland for Dragonstone, an act seen by other dragonlords as cowardice. Nearby Driftmark had already been settled by House Valyrian, a lesser Valyrian family, and Claw became ruled by the Valyrian Celtigars. Doom of Valyria. The Doom of Valyria was a cataclysmic event in 102 BC, after which the city Valyria was utterly destroyed and the Valyrian Freehold crumbled and was no more. The Doom fragmented the land surrounding the city itself into numerous smaller islands, creating the Smoking Sea between them. The area is now described as demon-haunted, and most people are afraid to go there, as all known expeditions to the Shattered Peninsula has ended up in failure. Hence the quote, "The Doom still rules in Valyria." With Valyrian leadership destroyed, the lands outside of the peninsula fell into chaos in the ensuing Century of Blood, which saw the rise of the Free Cities. Assaria, the lost Free City, was reduced to ruins by the Dothraki, while Essos, the 10th Free City, was abandoned after the Red Death Plague. Legacy. At its apex, the Freehold's capital, Valyria, was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Most of Valyria's culture, language, and craft was lost in the Doom, which was followed by the Century of Blood. Valyrian descendants scattered across the world, many across the surviving Valyrian colonies, the Free Cities, and across the cities of Slavers Bay. Many of the surviving Valyrians intermarried and became mixed with other peoples. Their descendants speak in various local dialects of Valyrian. Valyria is remembered for its ability to raise and command dragons, and using them as weapons of war. This was demonstrated by the Targaryens, the last of the known Valyrian dragonlords, who used that knowledge to conquer and rule the 7 kingdoms. Valyria is also remembered for forging weapons made of Valyrian steel, a magical alloy used to make weapons of unparalleled quality. The secret of forging such metal was apparently lost with Valyria, making those remaining weapons highly treasured and extremely rare. Cities. Ruined cities. Old Valyria. Tyria. Oris. Surviving colonies in the Free Cities. Lorith. Lys. Mir. Norvos. Pentos. Qohor. Tyrosh. Volantis. Valisar. Selharis. Volandaris. Surviving colonies in the Valyrian Peninsula. Mantaries. Illyria. Tolos. Surviving cities in Slavers Bay. Myrine. Astapor. Yunkai. People and culture. Valyrians are famous for having silver gold hair and violet purple eyes, characteristics not found amongst any other peoples of the world. This can vary from white to silver gold to blonde hair, and from lilac to deep purple and pale blue eyes. The most noble of Valyrians were considered strikingly, some say inhumanly, beautiful. The Valyrian nobility valued purity of blood. Therefore, the practice of incest was common in Old Valyria, as the Valyrians would customarily wed brother to sister. These practices were not limited to the Freehold. On Dragonstone the Targaryens continued to practice incestuous marriage and polygamy to keep the dragon bloodline pure. The language Valyrians spoke was High Valyrian. Religion. The Valyrians had a number of different gods, including Valyrian, Meraxes, Vagar, and Syrax. According to some scholars, the dragonlords regarded all faiths as equally false, and looked down on clergy and temples as relics of more primitive times, but useful to placate the lower classes with promises of a better life to come after death. Thus, they promoted religious tolerance in order to keep their subjects divided, and prevent them from unifying under the banner of a single god. Magic. The people of Valyria were very strong in magic, and they would use their powerful wizards and their dragons in conjunction with their armies to conquer most of Essos west of the Bone Mountains. Dragons were controlled by whips, magic horns, and sorcery. Governance. The Freehold of Valyria at the zenith of its power was neither a kingdom nor an empire, or at least it had neither a king nor an emperor. Instead, all freeholders, or freeborn landowners, had a say in its governance. In practice, however, the Freehold was ruled by the Lord's Freeholder, powerful noble families. They were 40 families of great wealth, high birth, and strong sorceress ability. Those families which controlled and rode dragons in battle, who came to dominate, were known as dragonlords. The Targaryens were one of these dragon houses. Architectural works. The Valyrians had great skill in shaping stone. It is often said that the old wizards of Valyria did not cut and chisel stone, but worked it with fire and magic as a potter might work clay, although much of their knowledge is now lost. Valyrians had a powerful magic which could liquefy stone and shape it how they wanted. Valyrian roads, known as dragon roads, still exist as monuments to their work, as do the Castle of Dragonstone, and the Black Wall and Long Bridge of Volantis. Slavery. One practice the Valyrians adopted from their wars with the old Empire of Guise was slavery. The Valyrians used thousands of slaves from across the continent in the blisteringly hot mines underneath the 14 flames to find gold and silver. Slave revolts were common in the mines, but the Valyrians were strong in sorcery and were able to put them down. When there was war, the Valyrians took thousands of slaves, and when there was peace they bred them. As the power of the Freehold grew, so did its hunger for ore, and the Dragon Lords led many conquests to keep the mines full with slaves. It is said so many perished, toiling in the Valyrian mines, that the number was so large as to surely defy comprehension. In the books. In the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, Valyria had no single ruler and was neither a kingdom nor an empire. Officially, all of the freeborn landholders, freeholders, had equal say in government, hence the formal name of their civilization was the Valyrian Freehold. In practice, however, this meant that the Freehold was essentially an oligarchy, run by wealthy noble families. There were about 40 such families of wealth, high birth, and strong sorceress ability. Known as Dragon Lords, they were the ones that owned dragons and tended to dominate the rest of the population. The Targaryens were one of these families, but far from the most powerful. Because this situation of powerful families was de facto rather than de jure, the Dragon Lord families were not noble houses as the Westerosi understand them. The Freehold not only conquered the Giscari Empire, but also the city-states of the Rhoynar people established around the Rhoyne River, leading to that people's exodus across the sea to Dorne. The modern free cities, as well as several other cities throughout Essos, were established as Valyrian colonies and became independent after the Freehold was shattered. The major exception to this is the free city of Braavos, located in the extreme northwestern corner of Essos. Braavos was founded by escaped slaves who fled their Valyrian captors, and the city remained hidden even long after the doom of Valyria. For this reason, Braavos is thus sometimes referred to as the bastard daughter of Valyria. The Valyrians had a strong policy of religious tolerance. Everyone in the Freehold, from Dragonlord to slave, was free to believe in and practice whatever religion they chose, as long as they fulfilled their duties and paid their taxes. In fact, some of the free cities were founded by religious dissidents who found the Freehold too tolerant. Allowing such measures was basic good governance on the Valyrians' part, and also a means of keeping their large slave population under relative control, i.e. placated people were less likely to rebel. The Valyrians themselves had their own gods, but the maesters of Westeros believed that the Dragon Lords were so arrogant that they considered themselves above any religious affiliation, including their own.
If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.